Hello and welcome. My name is Joel Thiessen. I am a Senior Emerging and Digital Media Specialist here at UBC Okanagan, and I will be doing some light moderation for the session here today. And I'd like to welcome you to Constellation Part 1, Enhancing Teaching with Audio and Digital Technology. I would like to first start by acknowledging that the University of British Columbia Okanagan's campus is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Silks people of the Okanagan Nation. And I would also like to present UBC's Respectful Environment Policy to remind us of the expectations to keep this room a respectful environment with constructive engagement. Okay, so we have a very packed 45 minutes here today with some really good presentations from our panelists, and I don't want to take too much time. We're going to be hearing from Dr. Margaret Carlyle and Stephanie Auche-Pratt and Dr. Fiona McDonald, and hearing about their engagement with Constellation and how they utilized technologies to enhance some of their course deliverables. And after the presentations, there will be a Q&A, so please jot down any questions you might have and save them for that time, and we will bring them back up and we will engage in that conversation. Also, after this session, we're going to have a secondary Constellation Celebrate Learning Week session where we will actually move through some of the spaces we're going to be talking about today. So if you are available and on campus, I encourage you to join us, and we will move through some of these spaces. We can talk more about them in detail and answer any questions that you might have about them. Now, for those who are not familiar with Constellation or what it is or what it means, I'll quickly sort of give an introduction, and we'll sort of set the stage for this talk as to what Constellation does and how we engaged with these two projects. Constellation is a network of centrally supported and technology-rich spaces on the Okanagan campus that are committed to empowering the community as they seek to prototype and enhance learning outcomes. They have several different entities on campus that you'll see on the screen here. Some of these are video studios, podcasting studios, immersive screen spaces, prototyping, and 3D printing labs. So it's quite a variety of high-tech space that is accessible and open to anyone on campus here. So we're really trying to engage and promote this sort of exploration. It also includes skill sets and just consultative services. So if you have questions, if you want to try something, but you don't really know where to start, Constellation is eager to engage with you in those conversations. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first talk. Dr. Margaret Carlyle and Stephanie Auche-Pratt are going to present on how they utilized Constellation services and how they enhanced teaching with audio technology. So I would like to welcome Stephanie. Thank you.
Thanks, Joel, for that really lovely introduction, and thanks to you for joining us and for all of the panel and who worked behind the scenes to make this workshop happen. I'm happy to be here today and to share with you alongside Stephanie Auche-Pratt, who is in the actual physical room today, with our experience on enhancing teaching with audio technology. Now, without further ado, I'll jump ahead here to share with you what we're going to cover in our half of the presentation. So in the first instance, I'm going to tell us all a little bit about what the students did in the class, which was to create a podcast, before looking at how podcasting ties into pedagogy. And then I'll pass the floor to Stephanie, who will lead us through bullets points 3 and 4 here on how podcasting augmented learning, and then lessons for instructors. And then, of course, we'll be happy to take any questions a little bit later on. But to start with, what did the students do in this class, this sort of upper level history class? Well, the short answer is that they created a podcast, their own original podcast episodes. So it was a class of 30 students. They're all third or fourth year students, but many of them were senior sort of graduating students. And we divided them into 6 groups. So each group created an original 15-minute podcast episode on any aspect of the course theme. And the course was focused on technology the history of reproductive technologies. Think of things like the birth control pill, condoms, in vitro fertilization, any kind of technology related to reproduction, human reproduction was sort of fair game. So our goal in this class was to use audio technology to create a podcast about reproductive technologies intended for a wider audience than a usual course. So a typical class, the classroom experience, you'd have just your instructor, i.e. me, being the kind of main audience for the final assignment or final series of assignments, because I'm the one grading them, of course, and maybe sharing, through presentations, your work as the semester goes along with your, fellow classmates. But we were thinking here about creating an assignment that led to a kind of wider audience, and it was designed not just for the instructor to read in the case of a classic essay, but actually for us to hear, and for all of us to hear, and for all of us to share in a wider kind of framework. So in terms of the CTL Learning Week's theme, keeping the human in the loop, it's interesting to think about where does the human fit in to this course, which is using audio technologies in order to trace the history of reproductive technologies, and where do humans fit into that, both in terms of the development of reproductive technologies and their history and their impact on society and humans, and as was receiving on the receiving end of the output of our class, which is this audio file, this audio production. So the groups had effectively free rein to choose the subjects of their episodes, and they really didn't disappoint in their creative choices. So in addition to covering topics that might be a little bit more familiar to us, like in vitro fertilization, we saw a whole range of topics being covered, including the history of sterilization, the history of eugenics. One group focused on a concept called the husband stitch, and if you don't know what that is, you'll definitely want to tune into that episode to learn all about it. So once the groups chose, their topics, within each group, students took on different roles. So it was groups of 4 to 5 students, and within each group, they had at least one writer, one voice, and one editor. But in many cases, they had 2 writers, 2 voices, and then 1 editor. So in each of these roles, students had very specific tasks and responsibilities that they were required to take on, but they were also then required to take on teamwork as well. So there was a combined kind of component in terms of the final grade, in terms of participation between their individual contributions to the team project. As writers, those generating the screenplays, if you will, or the scripts, those are lending their voices, their sort of talent to recording and of course the editor, who had a very big job of actually putting it all together and packaging it together to a compelling, 15-minute episode with a really, which we'll say a little bit more about later. But the students really leaned into the exercise, and they did not disappoint in their creative choices and in the hard work that they each put in as individuals and as team members to make this project possible. So in order to build the technological skills needed to create this audio knowledge, the podcast episode, we partnered with UBC Studios, and the digital design lab and the sound booth were totally instrumental to the success of this class. And I really wanted to say that, shout out to Taylor Wilson if you're in the room. Taylor Wilson was assigned to assist us after our initial discovery meeting with UBC Studios in order to help us train the students, provide workshops to the students, and kind of handhold us throughout the whole process. So thanks a lot to Taylor, who did a really fantastic job. And one of the things that Taylor offered us and that the booth kind of supported us with was to provide the students with workshops, sort of dedicated class time to learning about the ins and outs of pre-production, what to do to develop your script, your podcast script, before you actually go into producing it and then recording in the studio. That was the first workshop. The second workshop that Taylor offered was focused on production, on actually producing this audio knowledge, and then post-production and the editing process, and thinking about soundscapes and how to complement or the text itself as it was read out, and how to kind of create this whole sort of atmosphere through audio means, or through audio technology. We also had experts visit our class to lend their insights, including the inventor of the pregnancy test kit, Meg Crane, and she was a huge inspiration to students. We couldn't sadly fly her in from Brooklyn, from New York, but she did patch in via Zoom, and we had a really great question and answer session with her. And the students found that really inspiring to learn from, and not only female inventor whose invention was initially kind of dismissed or ignored in the early days of reproductive technology. And she developed the first pregnancy test kit and helped market it and design it for a kind of commercial market. So to achieve our pedagogical ends, which are both, really podcast creation and doing kind of high level research, writing and thinking, the kind of high level work that we expect at the advanced undergraduate level, we embraced a mixed format for this class. So in terms of what the students did is they created a podcast, but they were doing a lot of other things throughout the semester to build their knowledge in these kind of incremental steps. So I provided lectures, we had plenty of seminar style discussions, they engaged in group work and had many benchmarks along the way, on which I'll say more in just a minute. We had the workshops that were offered by Taylor Wilson and UBC Studios, provided the full support for that. And as I mentioned, those were absolutely instrumental to the success of this class. And then we also took the students on a field trip to UBCO's School of Nursing Simulation Room. And it was there that they saw these birthing robots in action and were able to see kind of technology in action, and had technologies like birthing robots are used in simulations in the classroom to train nurses, nurse practitioners, physicians, and so on. And of course, there was the hands-on podcasting work. I'm going to now move to the second part of the presentation, bullet point number 2, how podcasting ties into pedagogy. Well, how does it tie into pedagogy? Writing a traditional research essay, which we so often do in history, we often are over the course of our undergraduate experience in history, building towards word or cheer alter research essay and to do something else final assignment. It was actually anticipated. So research, write, record, and produce these episodes with original audio content. And this ought to be intellectually sound, so it had to have all the rigor of, for example, Orwell Reed's final essay. It also needed to be engaging and also technologically innovative. So where the soundscapes came in, sound environment or kind of ecosystem that each group created with their individual episodes that resonated with the style, genre, and they wanted to have the soundscape that would match that. And it's a job, as you'll hear if you take a minute to tune into some of our episodes. So this form to create, it does maybe at first blush kind of at odds with academic research, but I found that it was really compatible with the kinds of learning outcomes that we normally expect in my discipline in history, because students at the end of the day, they did develop excellent research, critical thinking, and writing skills. And then on top of that, they developed all these sort of audio technology skills, and the medium of sound also became a big part of their thinking and their critical thinking. To make this project manageable in a way that was clear to the students and that kind of got students on board with the idea and then always working towards deadlines, we broke the podcast project down into really achievable steps. And it culminated in the submission of this, final audio file, the podcast episode. And that's what you hear now and can see and link into. We'll share a link to this at the end of our part of the presentation. You can listen in and tune into the episodes. But it was at the end of the term that they, submitted that audio file. But all along the way, they had many, many benchmarks to meet to get to that point where they could submit the final audio file. And the final audio file submission was only worth about 15%, but it was many steps before that, prior to that, to the lead up, that were worth some of the final grade. And so it was definitely designed so that students couldn't, pull an all-nighter or, create their episode, a day or two before the deadline. That was simply impossible in this. The students to really work well as a group, prepare their script carefully, get feedback on it, pitch it to us, and then build towards this final piece of work, really. And foster teamwork and skills building around project planning and execution. So creating the project was really, or the episode was really a multi-step, long-term project that started virtually the second the semester began. We already started talking about deadlines, forming groups, pretty much from day one. So they really had to hit the ground running. Also, as part of the final assessment, so besides submitting the final audio file in a kind of clean format, I asked each group to keep a self-accountability log. that informed their group grade, and a final individual reflection on the experience as a whole. So these were two sort of separate assignments. One of them was to just keep track of when they met and all the work that they did individually and as a group, and the other was an individual reflection piece. So the students still got to do some writing and kind of critical thinking in that sort of more traditional form, and they also had to do a kind of accountability log as project planners, like how are you going to get your project done on time, how are you going to meet the benchmarks, and all of the groups were absolutely successful in this regard. So I'm happy to talk a bit more about that in the Q&A. Finally, on how podcasting ties into pedagogy, it's important to point out that I did not run this class alone. It was my first try at teaching this class, and I have many ideas about how I can refine the class and improve upon it. But there's no way that it would have been possible without all the support that I had, because students did check-ins with Taylor Wilson at UBC Studios, and they also really leaned on Stephanie, who I'll pass the floor to in just a minute. And I was lucky enough to have Stephanie, and I was able to hire Stephanie as a graduate research assistant, a GRA, using a CTL grant, teaching and curricular innovation grant. So I was really grateful for that, because the class wouldn't have gone off the way it did, or probably not at all, had I not had that grant and the assistance of Stephanie. So on that note, I'll pass the floor to Stephanie to pick up where I leave off, which is where podcasting augments learning. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Margaret. So I'll be focusing on how podcasting augmented learning and lessons for instructors. So in this section, I'll share the role I played in the classroom and how the supports I provided to students in creating the podcast enhanced their learning, as well as mine in the capacity as a graduate research assistant. So my role in the classroom is specifically to provide hands-on technical and editorial support for students as they prepare their podcasts. I came into the classroom with prior knowledge, since I was also Dr. Margaret Carlyle's helped with the first season of the Reproductive Technologies podcast. I had honed editing skills using Adobe Audition and was ready to help students troubleshoot technical and audio issues that arose. I held office hours in UBC Studios and sound booth, helping students who dropped by get comfortable with the equipment. I also served as the first listener and reviewer of the podcast episodes for the groups that wanted to get extra help and feedback. Most groups took advantage of this extra step, and it was similar to getting feedback for a draft and essay. It just made the final product even stronger. I led lab day during class time, and a particular day where each group had the chance to test out the recording studio equipment with me. We found that this was a pivotal day and key to student success. For most groups, it was their first time getting into the audio recording gear, and it also dispelled any questions about the recording booth and the requirements for the final assignment. I also provided students support to the editors assigned to get their final episode into a clean, concrete format. And after the course ended, I had the job of bringing the files together under our podcast's UBC blog podcast network, which is currently live on Spotify and UBC blogs. In terms of augmenting learning, one of the ways podcast creation did this was by shifting the center of student creativity towards things like creating sounds or soundscapes with the help of Taylor, to do justice to the research and to translate their writing to a more traditional skill into the audio medium specifically. It was an exercise in mastering the art of audio communications, specifically asking questions like, what role do voices play? How can sounds be used to convey meaning and add emphasis to the ideas? This was a departure for most students who were used to writing formal essays, but they ran with the challenge. So focusing more on the lessons for instructors. So the fourth and final point we want to briefly raise about the podcast making class is some take-home lessons and thoughts for instructors. Margaret can also elaborate this in the Q&A. But for now, 3 things came to mind. The first was planning. Planning is everything. We learned that mapping out the course timeline and working closely with UBCO Studios, as well as advancing key concepts and ideas, was key to the success of this course. Second is research, which can definitely inform teaching. This podcasting student experience stemmed from a research project that Margaret and I have been working on, funded by the Shirk Insight Development Grant, focusing on the history of reproductive technologies. So it was a case of research informing teaching and the feedback loop between the two. And the third is giving students the creative leeway to transform challenging information into more approachable and accessible means to convey a message. Other listeners who may not be familiar with the subject now can take away something about reproductive technologies, which was our goal. I'm just going to go over the next slides. So this is the Reproductive Technologies Podcast website, and this is the season 2. We have season 1 and season 2. We hope people will be listening, and the link to the podcast. And here's some pictures that we have of the recording sound booth. And this is the lab we had in the nursing building, which was a birthing simulator, which is so much fun working with students on that. And then this is us, Margaret and myself, recording in the studio, many hours, but it was so much fun. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Margaret and Stephanie. Next, I am happy to welcome Dr. Fiona McDonald, and they will talk about using digital tools to teach in anthropology. So thank you very much, Fiona.
Okay, thank you very much. There's a lot of synergy going on in this conversation between what Margaret and Stephanie are sharing in terms of pedagogical lessons, but I think there's also something very critical here, is that we are bringing together research and teaching together through research grants. So the course that I'm going to be talking about today is not possible to teach without UBC Studios and without the collaboration with Joel Thiessen, because we hold together an Alt 2040 grant to co-create 2 non-credit micro-credentials, one on photogrammetry and object ethics, and another one on visual research ethics and more still and video capture as well. So I'm going to just move through the slides here really quickly. Now, similar to Margaret and Stephanie's course, what we're going to be discussing today is what the students did. It was a combination of bringing together learning the skills of photogrammetry and understanding object ethics in an anthropology class, specifically Anthropology 327. Course is called Things, Objects in Everyday Life. And it is a course, one of the first anthropology courses that we were able to advocate for to get a science computer lab so that we could actually facilitate this course. It was our second time running this course. We have 30 students enrolled, between 3rd and 4th year students. And what they're actually doing is sort of engaging in a multi-step process. So the course is designed to ensure their success, not only in the theoretical, but the technical. So it's a 2-day-a-week course where one day is dedicated to reading theory, and then on the next day, it's learning all the incremental skills of the digital, linking it back to the ethical use of objects. So they're not only building models. In this course this year, we really leaned into the methodological practice of research creation to tie it to pedagogy. So they were not only researching their objects and creating digital models in an individual way, they were also collaboratively working on a curatorial project, and they were co-curating an exhibition that would be then installed in the Visualization and Emerging Media Studio, VEMS, because this was the key role of one of these Constellation partners. Now, a key part of the work that we were doing and how research creation ties into pedagogy in anthropology is that we were actually engaging in multisensorial work and thinking about the role of the digital and how we think through our material lives and our material selves. And so I want to move through I'll point to the 2 points here, but I want to illustrate them to talk through exactly what we did and how photogrammetry can augment learning in anthropology, and some lessons for instructors going forward. But I feel I want to do it with a little bit of illustration. So here is the course. If anyone online wants to capture that QR code right now, it'll link you to a video, which is the 16-minute loop of the exhibition that captures the 30 unique 3D models that the students in the class made. It's not just models, but they also engaged in thinking about the object's biography, so the theory of the course, and the sort of technical access brought in this sort of praxis together, where they learned to take photographs, then build models. I'm oversimplifying it, but I'll get more specific in a moment on the next slide. We also brought in Matt Radar, who's a Canadian poet here at UBCO Okanagan, who led a poetry workshop so that the students could learn how to write free-form poems to tell the object biography. And then they sort of collaboratively negotiated how individuals would experience their digital object, and that was through sound recording. So we also got to engage in the sound booth in the Digital Design Lab, another element of the Constellation, and record their voices. So again, we enhanced the multisensorial of the digital in that capacity. But then as they sort of moved through, they're also thinking about what is the story of their objects. So the course then ends with them writing an essay. So they're kind of learning technical skills and still the theoretical knowledge that's required for a 3rd and 4th year class. So I'm going to switch the slide now to sort of walk you through a bit of a storyboard, if you will, of what this was like for us. This first image you see here is a thing of joy. And this is seeing 30 students present in every class, engaged in the theoretical and the practical, where they would access modules on photogrammetry to learn the software that specifically Joel was teaching them of reality capture, or I beg your pardon, first it was Darktable, then it was reality capture. But also then preparing them to come into my lab, the Collaborative and Experimental Ethnography Lab, to set up small photo booths in which they would then take photographs of their objects. So they were learning all these incremental stages from looking at a material object to rendering it into images to then processing that and reconstituting it as a digital. But they also had to work through whether or not they had the ethical right to digitize certain objects. So we talk about the legal, the moral, copyright, trademark, patent, and intellectual property. And for individuals who had objects in which they did not own the intellectual property to do, I then collaborated with the makers to get permission so that we could render these. So you see the next student working in the lab, sort of documenting their specific object. Then you see the next step within the classroom where students are working through these modules that Joel and I have created, and Joel's technical expertise is really the most instrumental part of this class. This class cannot run without UBC Studios and cannot run without Joel's expertise. And it's taking those photographs and then teaching them how the technical skills. So one of the things that's unique in this class in terms of like lessons for instructors is watching the increased digital literacy of students alongside the theoretical knowledge of anthropology. So these are giving students applied skills that they can take into their careers and enhance their sort of skill building on their CV. So when they walk out of this class, they not only are able to say introductory skills to Darktable and reality capture and 3D modeling, they're also able to say they have learned the principles of co-curation and collaboration, and they have an exhibition line on their CVs. So what you see in the second part of the level of research creation was the way we brought together all of their very material objects and brought them into the conceptual significance of them to sort of think through. And this resulted in an exhibition inside the Visualization and Emerging Media Studio. You can see all of the brilliant students there. And what's really important about a project like this in a class is that they individually work on their models, but they collaboratively curate an exhibition. So the stakes are there in that they're also helping each other on some of the technical aspects when it comes to model making, and they're learning sort of other soft social skills that to take into their world. Now, some of the lessons that I want to end on is that what we're offering in this course, and it can only happen because of the partnership with Constellation, is that we're offering what is truly experiential learning. It's not that you have to go out and go for a walk or do these things, but you can actually do experiential learning inside digital spaces and classrooms. and that it's site-specific to UBC Okanagan. I think that's really beautiful between Margaret and Stephanie's experience and ours, is that we are using the Constellation partners, all the elements within it, and also drawing out to nursing and thinking of these other sort of spaces, which is part of the richness of UBC Okanagan, for teaching courses that are designed to ensure each element scaffolds to ensure success, theoretically and practically in the digital schools, digital tools. Now, Margaret made a comment, and I just want to sort of thread that back to sort of wrap up, is that it was about keeping humans in the loop, Margaret, and in one of your points in this really important conversation today of Celebrate Learning Week, but it's also keeping the ethics and the human ethics dimension in the loop when we start to think about digital and digital storytelling and digitally mediated pedagogical experiences. So I think that's where I'm going to wrap up with the last lessons for instructors, is that these courses, 30 in a class, is a perfect size for experiential learning. It requires skills of studios, it requires department advocacy, and it requires student buy-in. So that's where I'm going to end. Okay, thank you.
Much, Dr. McDonald. Yes, and thank you everyone for joining us. We do have some time to run any questions, if there's any questions in the room or any questions from the online viewers. We can either have you turn your camera on or your mic on, or submit them through the chat. So I yield the floor if there is any questions. Question in the back.
Thank you so much for sharing of your experiences, and it's clearly a very, very rich and thoughtful process that you've had to go through with all the moving parts, the pedagogy, the technology, all of this together. So big congratulations on that. I'm curious, when you reflect back on this experience, what would you say were the places where you felt like you needed the most support and help? And I'm curious if they're the same across the board, or maybe unique as you went through this very rich and varied course development.
Margaret, do you want to go first?
Can folks hear me? And is it best if I turn off my camera and become a voice so that it's not choppy?
Yeah.
Turn off my camera?
Not that we don't want to see you, Margaret.
Um, and think a couple things. So it would have been impossible to run this class UBC studios. Certainly Taylor Wilson. If you're there, shout out to Taylor Wilson. Workshops are really, really important for students. You know, we have this class, we had history students, we had psych students. It was fairly interdisciplinary. And virtually none of the students, except maybe 2 out of 30, had had any experience in UBC studios prior to the class. So I think that kind of acclimatization of students to the studios and being, you know, not nervous to get into the gear and just, you know, working with these technologies was probably one of the bigger challenges, but it was made so much easier by having Stephanie and then the studios and Taylor kind of hand-holding and then guiding and training students so that they didn't need to be handheld. By the end, they were completely autonomous groups doing their thing and kind of rocking their episode production and editing. So that was, I guess that was a place where I probably needed the most support, but it was really a team effort throughout the class. And then I just wanted to briefly touch on a point that Fiona raised about human ethics. So I didn't say that much about it, but that's absolutely also part of audio storytelling, especially around topics that are sensitive and difficult and heavy, like reproductive technologies and thinking about reproductive justice, the body. Students sense story, you know, censoring out or cutting out key information. But they, you know, they were also doing it in a really sensitive and thoughtful and really artful way. So kudos to the students because it wasn't something that we gave them specific training on. You know, how do you ethically tell a story? And I think that's something I would seek out as further training if I were to teach this class again. But I was so lucky that the students really led in that initiative of telling the stories in a really thoughtful and ethically sound way. Thanks.
I think Stephanie, do you want to go next?
I think Margaret touched on everything I was going to say.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay. I think for like to echo you, Margaret, and Abir, thank you so much for that question, because I think I really need this like very clearly understood. I cannot do my job without UBC Studios and without Joel Thiesen's collaboration, because it's also co-imagining the possibilities of what multimodal anthropology is today. And so if we are trying to establish those skills and literacy for our students here, we need collaborations, we need the infrastructure, but we also need the time. And sometimes a 13-week class is not enough time to advance these skills beyond sort of just dipping their toes in while we're doing the theory. So sometimes even imagining a year-long class. But we're going for engagement as a learning outcome, not like perfectionism. So it's also just increasing that literacy. And I think having the infrastructure of really good computer labs for anthropology classes is essential. It's sort of the brains between the work we can do so that we can absolutely capitalize on the Constellation partner elements, so that we can then take whatever we're doing in the labs and bring it to VEMS for exhibition, or bring it to the makerspace for 3D printing. So I think there's a lot in there in terms of time and recognition that pedagogical approaches to the multimodal require a lot more labor outside of class for studios, for faculty, and for students. I think that's really important. Yeah.
Thank you.
If there's any other questions, I also had a question. Have both of you had run this course, your respective courses, for 2 years now, and the amount of time and preparation to be put into these courses to kind of sort of shake the structure of what's traditionally done in anthropology and in other courses, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of time. And I feel like the lessons learned coming out of each year are going to be really huge for everybody involved. What is that, I guess, like, what is this process for you to try to reinvent this course again, if it were to happen again? Like, what not even talking about technically things, but just how one engages with the classroom, how one structures it and paces it for students that might be feeling like this media, this technology is foreign to them.
And Margaret, can I go first? Is that okay?
Of course, please do.
I appreciate this question, Joel, because it's also responding back to the student evaluation, the SEIs, like we were just looking at them this morning for this class. And anecdotally, if we think of those first days of the class, one of the things that we say is, this is something you've never taken before. Like, this is the unexpected, here's what you're going to do, but also assuring students that we got you, and we're in this together, and we're all going to make it through together. So redesigning it also means what has to get changed in terms of some of the timelines, but sometimes introducing some of the digital elements before you've covered the ethical, it blurs the line. So I feel like in our second iteration of this course together, Joel, I feel like we did such a better job of achieving the timelines and getting the students to different milestones so that we were a week ahead of the final exhibition. So they did learn time management skills and project management skills and that as well. But I think the only things that I can consider to change is keeping attuned to conversations with you about the technology for photogrammetry and the theoretical emergent literature around the digital in anthropology related to objects and material culture theory and museums, and the way being able to articulate for students how this course can be brought into their everyday lives. But it's, again, the other thing is making sure that, and maybe Margaret could speak to this, this is considered an elective in anthropology. It's not a core requirement for majors, so therefore it can't always be offered every year. So I think in those interstitial spaces between its offerings, then we can catch our breath and redesign. That's sort of, they're a lot of work to keep living.
It's a big investment, yeah.
Yeah.
And then just feeding you. That's interesting is mentioned in your previous labor involved. That's collaborative. It takes a little time in advance to sort of pull out. And I think in my own case, I was really delighted that my head was on board because that was the first person I contacted to pitch the podcast making class 2. If you don't load. So that was the first step for me. In terms of, I actually only taught this class the one time, so this is my first shot at it. And I will take all the feedback, the course evaluations to sort of, when I think about and revisiting the benchmarks, the kind of pacing, the structure, those are all things that I'll reconsider. But I think we got it worked out fairly well. The timelines for everything, the first shot was once again, and from stuff. I also to celebrate Learning Week, I did CTL, lucky and fortunate to do that. And there's absolutely no way I would have contemplated running this class kind of from the ground up solo without the assistance of the GRA, without Stephanie's help. So I think I could probably run it on my own after having that grant, that kind of seed grant. And I hope that that was the intention of the grant, is to get a new kind of pilot class off the ground and then to try to turn it into only 4-year course major or from other all prerequisites class open beyond history. I wouldn't say controversial, but it's not necessarily something we do in history, and it actually worked out for the better because I got quite a few students from nursing, from the natural sciences, from psychology, histology, and so on. Really these things I'll the next time I run this class.
I just want to add too, I think that if we didn't already have the podcast season 1 done, my love for reproductive health and technologies, and also I went to every single class, I sat there with students and we built a familial relationships, so it made it easier for students to reach out to me, to come to office hours, to really get that support and help. And I hope that in the future, like, students are passionate like they were in the class, to kind of keep that momentum going, because I definitely feel like that contributed to their learning and my learning too. I learned a lot from them as well, so it was like a feedback.
Are there any questions online?
It doesn't look like we have any questions at the moment.
Can I ask a question then to Joel and Taylor? Do you mind? Sorry to put you on the spot, Mr. Wilson. Is that okay? So the question is, this is a very sort of like, we're centering learning week, but also what is it that UBC Studios and the elements of the Constellation learn from these experiences in terms of the way workshops get like sort of redesigned or facilitated? Because I feel there's a dialogical conversation there, and I'm just curious how the teaching supports that Studios offers also helps enhance any strategic planning in studios around pedagogy, or supporting pedagogy. Like how have these experiences been for you, apart from exhausting?
I'm probably the worst person to answer this question, but when it comes to how we've adjusted our teaching workshops, at least for myself, I can see control. Just taking on the more variety in classes, such as the podcasting course, for example, I will say just do video supports. Doing that, to me, opened up a whole new avenue of ways to instruct students on how to use their gear in addition to our usual policies and procedures.
Okay.
So I say that alone was a huge shift for the positive.
And does it help, do these teaching collaborations help you refine like your resources that you're handing out, or like shifting technologies as well?
Definitely. I mean, podcasting as we have it right now is quite huge, and it wasn't always that way. It was actually because of other courses, like there was a History 497 class just this next quarter, which really pushed us in that podcasting direction, which allowed us to get ahead of the curve. UBC Vancouver has not done any podcasting courses.
Give and stop, Mr. Wilson.
Shut up. Pass the very weak course.
Yeah, I think it's important that at Studios we do highly value our contributions to teaching and learning. There's a lot of, competition is not the right word, but it's easy to split our attention between research focuses and teaching and learning focuses, and they all have different merits to them, but to be able to provide this sort of centrally funded support to courses, help bolster them up with technology, help kind of deliver them and work through this delivery process is really good opportunity, and it really does need to be supported by our department heads, and that value needs to be maintained, and it can't, if we were to look at something that goes to cost recovery, then this would not happen. We'd be looking more towards a research, perhaps if there's budget, or we'd be looking more towards larger funding pools like the alt funding pools, where there's an ability to recover those costs from the projects we do. So this commitment is paramount. It wouldn't happen without it. Kind of in this area of emerging technology, it's a lot of energy to every year, if we were to engage with this type of project, every year we would have to check the landscape because it's rapid, it's fast, it changes every time. So there's a large investment of time, and there's a large investment of from time to time resources, making sure that the labs are up to snuff and the software, licensing, technology, hardware is all available. So yeah, I think it's something that kind of will keep us on the forefront of a lot of this work. The opportunity to offer a lot of different courses and the variety of courses to make it more attractive to students and have them give them more opportunities to try new things and apply their learning in new ways that is not available anywhere else. So I think that's what's really exciting from our end.
And I think one of the points in Celebrate Learning Week needs to be like a key focus on the site specificity of UBC's Okanagan campus and like what we are able to achieve in terms of changing students, sort of broadening their visions. I just think it's remarkably rich.
It's very rich, yes. And with that, we are at time. So thank you, Dr. McDonald. Thank you, Dr. Carlyle. Thank you, Stephanie, for joining. And yes, feel free to reach out, constellation.ok@ubc.ca, and any respective emails. So thanks, everyone, and have a good afternoon.
Take care, Margaret.
Everyone, take care. Enjoy the tour.